Okay. We are live yet again. Welcome back to the stream, Pedal and Lettuce. I guess we'll wait a bit more for a few more people to pour in, then we could start the discussion. I expect this to be a fairly detailed discussion about various ideas, so it's just gonna be, I guess, mostly a dialogue. And I forgot to get my special water, so if you give me a moment, give me a sec. Oh, hey Wolf and Kingsley, welcome to the stream. Alright, I'm gonna be talking about, hey Justin, we're gonna be talking about a bunch of very abstract concepts, so I'll try to make it as easy to digest as possible for everyone present. So we're gonna talk more about how to take Voyager's system for version 0.5, Sublighter, and Penmaker. So we wanna talk about how we can take this version forward, and we're just gonna workshop a bunch of different ideas. And there's three main ones that I want to tackle, which is GM Lite, multiple PCs, and pseudo West marches. So and all of these concepts sort of like overlap with each other a lot, so I won't be like tackling them separately. It's more like, you know, a few things at once. So based on what we talked about yesterday on yesterday's stream, I was talking about how I wanted to sort of try to make Voyager as GM friendly as possible, meaning obviously since I'm the one making the game, I should be able to run the game myself. So if I can put in the tools and the way the game works to make it easy for someone like me, who is by default more of a player oriented person, but I'm able to GM the game, which is to run it as a game master, which is then it should be possible for most other people as well. Have you ever tried to get into Warhammer 40k at any point in time? No, I have. Obviously I've heard of it and sort of know the basic rules, like, you know, on the map, and like you have to measure all that other stuff, but I'm familiar with the system, but I've not, you know, played it or anything like that. And I think it's a fair bit different from what I had in mind, because 40k is very much more like more of a classic war game kind of thing. This is more kind of more towards like a standard RPG sort of deal. So where was I? So yeah, so being able to run it as a GM, I wanted to implement sort of systems that make GMing quite easy. One thing that I can just show off some of the stuff I've worked on, which is, this is my Obsidian, which is where I just keep all the piles and piles of notes for the system. But what I want to show is this, which is one of the tools that I've been No, it's not the one. Where did I put it? Basically, there was a system I was putting in to help GMs make enemies and like enemies for people to like fight. Where is it actually? Version changelog. Yes, enemy design tools that lets you very quickly create an enemies. So how it normally goes for game masters in like more classic tabletops like Dungeons and Dragons is you have like a list of enemies that have stat blocks, meaning like, you know, they have their stats, they have their abilities, and it's a lot to process at once. If I were to run as a GM for this, I would not be able to process all that information at once. So one of the things I've done that I haven't implemented to the PDF yet, but is something I plan to put in, which is inspired also partly from one of Dungeon Coach's videos, which is called like 1 Minute Monsters, which is like a video he did about cooking up monsters and encounters for D&D in a very fast manner. And one of these tools is to have enemy templates. So this is using the old version 0.4 system, but there is like templates that you can sort of group enemies in based on like their tier. So you have like a classic minion, which is a very cannon fodder enemy. Then you have like you have a soldier, which is like a sort of equal in power to a normal player. And then you have an elite, which is like a mini boss type enemy. And these are like their power tiers. And then you have like a boss, which then gives like a general idea of how much health you should give the boss, what size you should give it, the actions you should give it, and its general stats. And then you will give like role templates to these enemies, which determines like their behavior and what they do in combat. So we have like frontline fighters, we have backline artillery types, we have supports, skirmishers, and tanks. Basically very general templates that you can group enemies into, so that if you want to cook up like an encounter immediately, you can just like take one of these templates and then like sort of fit any number of enemies into that. And then you have like other things like determining like their disposition and their archetype, which means like what sort of enemy they are. Are they like a dragon or an elemental? And that sort of determines what sort of special abilities they would have. So that's one of the... So that's like kind of something I've already been cooking in regards to sort of making things easy for GMs to run the game. But now it's sort of a matter of transitioning even further into that, or at least experimenting with that even further and sort of making it as GM-less or GM-light as possible. I say GM-light because it's actually very hard to make like a fully GM-less game. So if it comes to needing a GM, I would like to make it as light on GM duties as possible. And a lot of that has to do with like the duties of world building, of enemy design, of all these other things that make GMing such a daunting task for people. So if I will move the clip, if I move back to Scribbers, I've been partly workshopping it with some ideas that are not set in stone yet. But so if we're going with like a full GM-less idea, one of the ideas that I was having is the idea that, okay, so we were talking yesterday about how Voyager is sort of, you know, inspired from games like Arknights, Fire Emblem, these sort of tactics games. And a lot of these tactics games, they don't necessarily have like a main character. What they have is they have a large cast of recruitable characters that you recruit, form teams with, and then send on missions. So even games like XCOM, Valkyria Chronicles, all these games sort of have that common thread where it's more like is less of what you would expect from a traditional RPG like Skyrim, for example, where you make a character and you follow that character's journey throughout the entire campaign. And it's more like these other games I mentioned, where it's more like you are a recruiter selecting from a bunch of characters, and then your investment is less in an individual character and more in a group of characters and how they interact with each other. So it's a more of a communal type of investment. So leaning into that, I wanted to test out different ideas that might facilitate that kind of thing, because clearly at its core, I think Voyager is more like that flavor of game than like a straight up RPG. And I think, if I definitely want to like market and sell it to people with that target audience in mind, that I probably have to lean into these elements more. So going off of that, I was sort of experimenting with ideas on like the players at the table. So let's say there's 4 of you, sort of each making a bunch of characters who populate the world. So basically making like a bunch of character sheets, and from there you will sort of shuffle around these characters and send them out on missions, and that's sort of like the base idea that I had. And how you would, and this can be done with a GM, but if you were to be GM-less, then one of the ways that I was thinking about how to go about it is to delegate roles. So if I just zoom in here so you can read it, delegating roles to different players, and of course it's all workshopable. So there's like 3 main roles that I can imagine. So one main role is the liaison, and liaison is the person who actually plays the characters and gives them orders. So this is kind of what you would expect in like this tactics game. You have like the Doctor in Arknights, you have like Byleth in Fire Emblem Three Houses, or the main character, so to speak, who gives orders to the units. You have and of course actually these roles can be actually occupied by multiple people, so there can be more than one liaison, meaning more than one leader on the field, so that these 2 players can cooperate and give orders to the various controllable characters on the field. And then another role is I heard Valkyria Chronicles immediately lit up, followed by a Vienna flashbacks due to 4th game's ending. I've only played the first one actually, but I always remember liking the franchise very much, and just the general the feel of the kind of game, and that you're building up, you're sort of recruiting from a list of people and making your own team and forming attachments to it. I have very fond memories of the first game. There is this one character named Carl. Carl is like this engineer, and the engineer is not supposed to be like a DPS character. He's always like a very nerdy looking guy, and he was like very nerdy, cowardly, so I didn't really think much of him. But then during one mission, I just sent him on like a path to the side to try and do something, and it was at some point, I think, like things became like very bad. Like I was pinned down on one side by like a bunch of enemy forces, and Carl, which is the nerdy engineer guy, I had sent him on like this gigantic side quest on his own, where he's just like exploring just one side of the map by himself, trying to not get detected, and he had to like go and blow up an enemy tank by himself by setting up a bomb there. And that was like my best memory of that game, because it felt like, yeah, the characters are sort of like pre-generated, you select from them, but that experience in the game of Carl becoming the hero of that particular mission felt unique to my own experience, and that's sort of what I wanted to capture with this as well, where you kind of make your own guys and make teams with them, and it's not just one hero, because I think normally you wouldn't make a character like Carl. Carl is what you would think of as a side character, but because of that, because you're running a team, there are moments where these side character types have moments to shine just through how the gameplay emerges, and that's something that I really enjoyed and might want to capture with this sort of system. So going back to the roles here, you have the liaison who controls the characters, and the curator. So the curator is the person who is in charge of like the story or the mission, more or less. So they're the ones who sort of outline, okay, this is the objective, this is what you would do. They will like set up like the area, like okay, you arrive at this place and that place. So this is like the kind of the more traditional GM role of them, like setting up the things that the party does, but it's more so just setting the stage and then letting them interact with it. So it's still kind of a hands-off thing, and it can foreseeably be done by multiple players, because it can be like two players sort of bouncing off each other, talking about what could be in this world, where does this go, that kind of thing. Is sort of meant to be they're not meant to be hard roles. They're meant to be sort of general things that you can do that can be occupied by multiple players. And then you have the conversary, and the conversary is basically the guy who handles the enemies. So I think like enemy management is probably the hardest part to replicate in a GM-less system, because obviously you have to figure out how the enemies act, and have to act in a way that is not biased towards the player. So obviously if it's a player calling the shots on how enemies act, and of course you can do this with more mature game group who is willing to do that, but it's not always guaranteed that if a player controls an enemy that they're gonna not act in like a way that is biased towards themselves winning and that kind of thing. So what I was thinking is sort of delegating the role of the guy who runs the enemies, to a single role, the conversary. And the conversary would use the stuff like the enemy templates that I showed just now and all these other tools to very quickly set up combat encounters, setting up the maps, and then playing out combat. And typically all these other roles, the curator and the liaison, would be able to be overlapped by multiple players, but I would say that probably the conversary is the person who should not be playing a playable character whenever that particular combat is happening. So it is recommended, it's recommended that the conversary refrain from controlling any of the Voyager party during combat unless they are sure that they will not show bias towards them. Instead, control the opposition forces with the same level of strategy that the Voyagers would use, in a way that is conducive to a fun game experience. So obviously this is normal GM advice as well. Just basically like, if you KO a character, you shouldn't like gang up on them to try to kill them, sort of spread around the damage, these sort of general practices. And that's sort of where that is at in terms of how I would say lay out the roles in a GM-less setting. But if you're going with like a GM light setting, which is basically there is like a set GM person who does the roles of like the liaison, conversary, and the curator, then there would be, I wrote it somewhere. I wrote a part where it says that if you want to run the game with your table is also free to run this game with a traditional game master, If anything, the tools provided that help players run the game among themselves would be doubly useful for experienced GMs looking to smoothen the game experience for their players. So I would say that either way, this game should be able to run well with or without a dedicated game master, but I guess it's just more a matter of which do I pick as the default, because obviously that will determine how I lay out the instructions for playing the game, whether it's either like how it's laid out now, which is it's like GM-less by default, but you have the option to have a dedicated GM, which means that they will just occupy all of these roles at once, or by default you have a GM as it was in previous versions, but if you wish to delegate these roles, here are the types of roles that you can use in your games, and so it's fairly flexible in that regard. So then that is sort of touching upon the GM Lite aspect. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about the multiple PCs section. So for multiple PCs, what I was thinking about is how to go about players having multiple PCs. And you know, when I say all these ideas, obviously it doesn't mean we need to have every single one of them. Some of them might make the cut, some might not, or some might sort of evolve into something else, but we're just sort of tackling all of these at once because they all sort of overlap with each other, and that's sort of the topic for discussion. So with multiple PCs, the idea is, like I said, we have, like, let's say you have 4 players at the table, and you would work together to, and this during the character creation phase, you would make a pool of characters, basically like a recruitment pool of characters. So each one would make about 2 or even 3 or more characters, and they would all shuffle them into a pool, and you know, you would like choose their race, their basic abilities, all that sort of stuff, basically a bunch of starting characters, and you would put them into a pool of them, and then whenever you want to start a mission or do anything at all, you would recruit characters from that pool. So the idea here is that because the feel of Voyager, right? The feel of Voyager is, the entire premise is that Exodus is this expedition commission, right? Which is sending out people on missions throughout the world beyond to explore an unknown world, and it's recruiting people from all over the known world in order to send them on missions. So in a way, by actually having it in game that players have to make a pool of characters to recruit from, it's almost like it's replicating that in-world experience of Exodus recruiting people in the universe and sending them out. So it's almost like it's, you know, replicating that experience, which I think will make for a very interesting way of playing the game, because it's all about matter perspective, really, because the default perspective is like you are one of the Voyagers that is recruited by Exodus to go on missions, and that's sort of like how you play that. It's like a traditional RPG, but now it's more like from the perspective of the recruiters, where you are the one recruiting the PCs, and you have like a number of them to select from, if that makes sense. But then of course, so far, you know, we've talked about in the server, and people are still sort of like 50-50 on it, but I was thinking about, like, you know, if let's say we wanted like kind of a compromise in the middle, one possibility is that we will have multiple playable Voyagers, but then let's say your player can have one main Voyager and a group of recruits. So I know there was this one game called Ars Magica, And Ars Magica is sort of one of the more well-known games that did this sort of multiple PC format, and that was called the Troop Play system, where you made like a wizard, because it was about Ars Magica was about wizards, and so you had this wizard guy, and you would make a companion for the wizard who is basically like a warrior or someone else that is not the wizard, and then you have like grogs, they call it, but grogs are basically like side characters. They're like very expendable, and they don't have much detail regarding them, but there's sort of like a hierarchy of playable characters, and I believe people like took turns playing the wizard, but we're mostly talking about like the multiple PC system in that game. And if, let's say, we wanted to emulate that kind of system, then let's say that each player would make their own main Voyager, and that is sort of like, and they would play those Voyagers like how you would play it like a traditional RPG, so like D&D and all that, where you would follow the journey of this one character, but that character may be accompanied by a group of recruits, and the recruits are basically like similar to your Voyager, but they maybe have less stats and all that, because your main Voyager is sort of who you would invest like your stats and your abilities into. So they have like slightly better starting features, let's say, and more room for growth. And these recruits are the ones that anyone can control, so you would have sole control of your main Voyager, but the recruits are people that you can sort of shuffle around and hand off to anyone. So that's the difference between the two. And let's see, and if you end up growing attached to the recruits, then you can probably take certain steps to invest into them and give them levels and make them on par with your main Voyager. So it's sort of like an opt-in system where by default you just have the one main guy and a choice of recruits that you can bring along and control, and that's sort of like the gateway for people to try controlling multiple PCs if they wanted to. But if they are really comfortable with the idea of multiple PCs, then they can sort of adopt one of these recruits as one of their own and really like invest into them and make them into like a proper unit. So like if using like a gacha example, like Genshin, you have like the Traveler, and in Honkai Star Rail you have the Trailblazer, and that's like the main character of the game, and that's the one that has a lot more growth potential than the others because they can learn like multiple elements and stuff like that, but they still sort of level at the same rate as the others because they gain levels the same way you would ascend them and give them weapons. They're mechanically they are very, very much the same as the other characters, but they just have a bit more room to do other stuff. So then that will be sort of like your main playable character, and then the recruits are like all the other characters that you would gacha for and like build teams around. So that's like one approach to the multiple PC approach, as opposed to just having a pool of people with no discernible difference between them. So that's one option. So it's like to sort of visually represent it. It's like, let's say you have the four players, and each player would have like their own main Voyager, whatever you want to call them, and these are people that they have sole control over, but then there is like a shared pool of characters that they can pull from. So this is like all sorts of other recruits and other side characters that they can take from to join their party in that sense. So in some cases you might want to, I think in most cases people would just bring along their main Voyager along on their party, and then sort of maybe bring along one or two of these recruits just to sort of help their numbers, let's say. But there may be, because if you want to like encourage this sort of playstyle, there should be some mechanics in place that encourage people to use the recruits, where maybe there will be some aspects where you can send out your main Voyager out on a mission, or you have like multiple missions going on at once. So let's say in one session all of your main Voyagers are out on this mission, and then on the next session, because they're still out on that expedition, you can't use them, so you have to like go and take and recruit another group of PCs and take them on a different expedition. So it's almost like there's like multiple expeditions going on at once. And yeah, like kind of pre-gen characters in D&D, where, because definitely the recruits at least will be pre-generated for the most part. So like the main Voyager that you have would obviously be your own, so you can sort of create them from scratch. But the recruitment pool would be a bunch of pre-generated characters. So I would say, you know, like all the characters you see like Vesper and Suki, Jadane, those sort of characters, they would sort of be in that recruitment pool. And then, but of course that would be, if you wanted to like add more characters, like if you're the type to like who likes making character sheets and all that, you would make a new recruit the same way you would make like your regular Voyager, but then you can add it into the pool. So let's say this guy over here, let's say I have my main Voyager, but you know, I have like this idea for a character. I have this idea for a character with a very different type of ability style, or maybe another different idea. So then, but of course I don't really have time to play them, or you know, I don't really have an attachment to them. I just have a cool idea. So then I would say that okay, then you can add them into the recruitment pool. So then you have the pre-generated characters, and then you can also make custom characters and add them into the pool so that you can recruit them on your adventures. And that's sort of probably how I would go about sort of compromising between having like multiple PCs versus having like solo PCs, which is sort of like a hybrid of both. And how that leads into, and that leads back into the pseudo West Marchers idea. So let me get a quick drink. So to really quickly summarize what West Marchers is, and my explanation will be kind of inaccurate because I'm not that familiar with it, just a general vibe, is that West Marchers is a sort of D&D thing where I think this man called Ben Robbins, he had this sort of game with his gaming group where he wanted to run D&D for like a larger group, like 10 or more people. So obviously that's not something you can feasibly do by yourself, like running a game for 10 people. So what he did was he made like this sort of, I want to say kind of like a guild system where every time a bunch of players want to do something, they would, that group of players would form a group and they would say, oh, we want to go do this adventure. And then the GM would say, okay, here's your time slot and we'll do it on this day. And then so it's a bit more of like an open lobby kind of thing, where if players wanted to play a game, they would sort of group together and ask the GM that they want to go on an adventure, and then they will do it. And what made it interesting, the West Marches format, is that it had like a very MMO type vibe, like an open world type vibe, because instead of like a regular D&D game feels more like an RPG where you're sort of just like following a bunch of people on like a singular linear journey, but with the West Marches it's almost like an MMO where you have like a lot of different players at once, all doing different things at the same time in the same world. So in a West Marches game, there's like this big map or setting that the GM makes, and normally there might even be multiple GMs who are sort of working together to coordinate these multiple groups. And these GMs, you can almost imagine them like, you know, like guild masters, right? Because they're sort of like running this exploration guild in the same setting, and they have like this big map where the players can come in and say, oh, we want to explore this area, and then one of the GMs would be, okay, we're gonna do that, and then another group might say, oh, I want to go to this spot on the map, and then the GM would say, okay, another GM would run that game, and both of those games are happening at the same time in the same world. And that was a very intriguing idea, because it sort of gave the idea of a persistent world. So the immersion involved for the players is not so much in like the individual characters or story arcs that you would expect from a regular RPG, but the immersion is more like less that you're like a protagonist in a story, but more like you're part of like a larger world. You're part of like a community of adventurers who are going out on missions and sort of bringing back more information. Because let's say I have this map diagram, right? And let's say we're running a West Marches type game. If a group, so let's say they have like, so let's say here's the home base, and you have like a bunch of GMs here, and we say that one group of players say we want to go to this area, and then another group of players say we want to head out to this area to explore. So whenever they go to explore and have a session there, a game session, they will then conclude it and come back and report their findings on what they found. So it's like, oh, we found a hidden temple on this side of the map, but we couldn't open it. So maybe another group of players, they hear about it, they hear about this secret temple after the red team comes back, and they say, okay, we heard the rumor that there's this temple that they couldn't open, maybe we can try it out. So then they head on over to that same area that they heard red team went to, and they'll go check it out, and maybe they were able to figure out and bring back loot. So, and that really caught my imagination, because it's like, I think it really suits the type of vibe that kind of Voyager is trying to do, which is like, obviously you're running like this kind of big expedition commission to explore the world, so it feels like there should be multiple voyage parties going out and exploring the world, bringing back their findings, and then other groups hearing about it and interacting, and it feels like you're part of a persistent world, right? And that, I think, is part of what I wanted to capture here. And why I say pseudo West Marches, because obviously it's not the same as like a normal West Marches, because a normal West Marches has certain mandatory things that you need to do, like it has to have certain criteria. So I say pseudo because it's not entirely a West Marches thing, but it can be based on that, because obviously here, if we're going with like a GM-less system or a GM-light system, then all the players are kind of like their own GMs, meaning that it's more like they decide where the party goes, because they have like a pool of Voyagers and recruits that they can send out into different areas of the map to adventure and stuff like that. So I think knowing that what the general feel of Voyager I want to capture, I think that these 3 pillars can probably be refined and polished to work well into that fantasy, because the fantasy I want to capture is that of like you and your Voyage team are part of like a larger thing, you know, a larger something bigger than you that's sort of trying to explore the entire world and map it out. And there's this feeling of discovery and community with people and sharing your findings and, you know, doing that sort of thing. Because and this is like a pipe dream, so this is like further on into the future, but one thing I've always sort of imagined would be cool is that if, you know, imagining that there were enough players for the Voyager system, and they all sort of like, you know, they go to like a community, let's say the Discord server, or they have like forums that they meet up on. Every so often, as new content for Voyager, I would like release things like events. So, you know, like how, let's say an MMO or like an online game has events where you have to do something, or like how Genshin has events. So if like eventually Voyager has like a proper player base, the game will sort of release events that says like, oh, this enemy has descended upon the world and you need to sort of take them on, or this sort of, we discovered a new ruin in this area, and during that time players would join in on that event and have their campaign set based on that event. So, you know, players around the world will be like, okay, we're gonna go and sort of explore this new ruin, which is basically just like an expansion or new adventure, but it's sort of flavored in a way that it's as if all of you who are playing it are kind of in on it at the same time. It's almost as if all of you are sort of in real time exploring that event together, and all of your different PCs and Voyage teams are sort of like exploring different areas of this event in that sense. So that's kind of like the idea I had. And so for these 3 pillars, we'll probably polish it somehow that maybe it could be GM-less entirely or more GM light. The GM light could work because if we have like if we went with the format I said just now about like how we have like the players playing like these PCs and then a recruitment pool, then so these are the PCs, right? So these are players, and then the GM would be the one who is arranging all the adventures. So imagine if the format is like, so the format is like you have the game world, and then the GM is the liaison here, and the GM is the one that says like, okay, we have a new adventure here, we have a new mission, who is going to volunteer for it? And then the players will be like, okay, I'm going to send my guy over to that mission, I'm going to send this guy and this guy with a group of recruits. So the GM is sort of the person curating the adventures to everyone, and then the players are sort of deciding who to bring along or who to send on the expedition, because what I'm picturing is sort of like a job board where different players and the GMs, they would post up like missions on a board, or like some sort of, you know, a guild system where, and these are basically just campaign ideas, right? These are just like, oh, we found this ruined temple over here, or we found this activity of a raider band here, or we found a dragon sighting over here. So it's just like really small pieces of information that they will put up, but then their players, so the GM would be putting jobs up on this board, and then the players would see which ones they want to do. Okay, we want to do this dragon thing, and then they would decide who they want to send on that adventure. So okay, I'm going to send my main guy on the dragon mission, but then the other players, they might want to do something else. They might say, oh, I want to save my main guy on this other mission, so I'm gonna instead send like one of the pre-generated recruits, but then I get to play as that recruit. So it's like less investment overall, but you still get to play as someone. So you know, if this guy says like let's say this dragon mission, and this guy sends his one main guy who is like his main PC there, but then other players want to join in, they'll say, okay, I'll play as this other recruit who goes along instead. So that could be I send along this recruit, but I'll send my main guy onto like another quest that I wanted to do, and that's sort of like having a bunch of concurrent adventures at once. And I think the bigger the group is, or the more liaisons or GMs that they are, the more that this will capture that feel. And especially if there's like community tools, like you know, like the Discord, like you know, any sort of thing that that sort of has that community feel to it, where a lot of different, like you know, Pedal and Letters and Kaibi, local Kaibi, and all the other GMs in the server, they can sort of imagine themselves as all as in world as a bunch of liaisons, each picturing their own teams all in the same world going on different missions at the same time, and that's sort of the feel that I wanted to capture with this. And that's going back to the map. So there are ways to go about this for the map. So the map would be very important to sort of capturing this feel, and I was thinking there was two ways to go about this. So for map, so we have like a basic map here, and this is just something that I did like on the fly. Not on the fly, but it's just a very, very basic map. There's no features, no nothing. It's just sort of to generally describe the geographical areas of the factions. But what I want to do is make like a more detailed map that players can use to arrange their adventures. And so let me explain the two types of maps, or the two types of exploration that we have. So we have the known map here. So we need rules for exploring the known map, and we need rules for exploring the unknown. So this is the map of the known world. So this is where all your player characters will come from. This is where all the known factions are. You know, everything that you read in the rulebook is contained within this area. So anything beyond that is, you know, anything that goes further than this point is all like unknown basically, and that's like the world beyond, right? So I will need rules to sort of have facilitate exploration within the known world and beyond the known world. So what I was thinking, so this is something I've been trying to workshop as well, which is let's say that, let me make a grid real quick. So what I was thinking is that to have this map on the book or as a printable thing, and this is the map of the known world. And how players may want to start their adventures is, let's say Let me cook up a grid real. So let's say that 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm just gonna cook up a really fast grid here, just to sort of communicate what I'm trying to say, which is the idea that because we want to have the idea of a persistent world in Voyager, that basically all the players playing the game Voyager, so this is kind of a meta concept, but all the players that are playing Voyager are all playing it at the same time. They're all inhabiting the world at the same time, and they're all going on adventures within that world. And so one thing that I might be able to do is that, let me just make this real quick, is one thing that I might be able to do is to have the known world be the persistent world part, and we would have something like, let's say, a grid. Okay, and using this grid, hang on, my clip is lagging. This is like a 10,000 pixel wide map. Okay, so it's working now, hopefully. Okay, alright, so let's say this is the map of the known world, and when players start their campaign, they are met with this map, and it would be probably labeled. So let's say, you know, we have this would be A1, and this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, 5, 6, so on, and this is column B, column C. Oh no, this is row, so this is the row D, E, F, so that sort of thing. So what I'm trying to accomplish here is that within the map of the known world, either the GM or the players can implement points of interest. So points of interest are things like missions, are things like rumors, are basically anything that they think would be interesting. So, you know, a dragon was sighted here, a ruin was found here. So anytime that either the GM or the players know something about a point of interest, they would then seed it on the map. So let's say here, so let's say someone found a ruin like here, right here. So then that will be like a point of interest, that will be like a mission on the job board, and this can either be like implanted, like you choose where to put it on the map, so on this grid, or it will be something that you could roll. So let's say let's say I were to imagine that this map was divided into like 20 squares each, like 20 by 20 or 20 by 10. Let's say it's 20 by 10. So I'll grab a 10-sided die. So I have a 10-sided die representing the vertical column or the rows, and then representing the horizontal rows, and then I have a D20 representing the vertical columns. So let's say that I want to implant a point of interest. So if the GM wants to make a new adventure, or they want to add a new job to the board, they would say, okay, I want to put something somewhere, where do I put it? So they would roll a D20 and a D10 and see which part of the map that point of interest will fall on. So if I roll a 4-1, So that is row 4 and column 1. So it would be here, way on the edges of this part of the map. Let's roll again. 8, 2. So this would be row 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And column 2. So this would be the general area where another point of interest would be. And then let's roll again. 7, 7. So row 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So somewhere here. So using this map system, this would be an easy way for GMs to sort of mark places on the map that things could be found in, right? And because these places are so far apart on the map, so let's say that you know, this is your home base in New Cambridge, right? So you can only, so logistically you can only do so much. You can only send like one team here, but then after you finish your mission you have to come all the way back. So how do you handle multiple points of interest is that, like I said, you have the multiple PC teams or the recruits, where you would send one team to this area, point of interest. At the same time, you're already fielding a new voyage party to go all the way here to explore this area. So this sort of, I think, really can sort of hone in on the exploration aspect of it, and it has, you know, that persistent world vibe to it where there's like things being discovered on the map all the time, and then anytime that it's discovered, the GM would mark it off the job board, and then if they wanted to add more, they'll just roll again and see where on the map that point of interest would lie. And how I would probably, like, you know, like emphasize this further is probably like giving certain recruits or characters certain buffs or affinities. So let's say dust is like around the desert area, right? And this is sort of like the plains area. So we can say that if your recruit or your character is from that region, so if your character is from Dust or if your character is from the Vinelands, they would gain like a certain bonus or certain buffs when they're in that area. So that incentivizes you to have, you know, these multiple recruits and multiple characters, because then that means, there's a point of interest, there's a mission in Dust, but we don't really have any characters who are there, so we should try to recruit from, you know, the recruit list of people. So we should recruit from like the recruitment pool and gather like a bunch of pre-gen, you know, all those characters who are familiar with Dust, and form a team and go there. And that might, you know, encourage players to try out new play styles and different types of builds and team compositions, because, you know, they have to, because all of their main guys are out on another mission, so they have to like try out a new group of people and take them there. And that is for like exploring like the known area. And for exploring the unknown parts, I'm not sure how you go about that, but I think going on like the West Marches idea, the GM, I mean, any GMs will probably sort of, you know, make up new adventures and set them on the map. And so like if the GM sort of has a basic idea, okay, we're gonna base it around here, so maybe like they'll extend the map outwards a bit more, or they'll tell their party that we're gonna conduct an expedition. So one of the job boards is expedition to the edges of sector 4-1, right? And so okay, we're gonna volunteer for the expedition. So this is not to explore anything known, this is to survey. So this is called surveying. So surveying is to map out new areas, and so a survey mission would be to explore a part that is outside of the known map, and for that the GM would make up new areas. So this is for homebrewing, where the GM wants to make new things or new creatures or new locales for people to explore. Then they would use they would call it a surveying mission, where the party will go out and basically do like a custom adventure where the GM basically makes up whatever they want outside of the reaches of the known world. So we have like tools in place to facilitate making campaigns and adventures within the known world, which is all the stuff that is in the rulebook, all the factions and known stuff that already exists, and then we have tools for homebrewing and making new adventures for your party as well. And that is the kind of summary of everything that I just mentioned regarding like the 3 systems. So with that said, are there any thoughts? Because I'm just sort of shooting into the dark here, because I know that generally this is sort of the vibe that I want to go with, and I think the more that I'm talking about it, the more I'm kind of sure that this is sort of like, this is sort of like the vibe that I want to go with, like sort of exploration, the exploration vibe. So I'm gonna think about what next to talk about. Right, so in regards to creating multiple PCs actually, so this I guess could be the point of the next discussion. So obviously if we're going to have like the idea of having multiple playable characters, so let's go back to this diagram. So if we have the idea of multiple player characters and also a pool of recruitable pre-generated characters, then I will need to simplify how character creation works now. So how character creation and progression works now is that it's fairly in-depth and involved. So it's like a traditional RPG where you learn a bunch of abilities and you level up to like level 20 or whatever, to a max level, and then sort of progress your character that way, which is obviously, it works for like solo PCs. But if I know that players are going to be making multiple characters, or at least playing as multiple characters to sort of bring on missions and stuff, I'll need to make it easier so that it's not hard for them to sort of remember what everyone does, and so it's as smooth of an experience as possible. So from what at least one person has said, which is while playtesting it, one of the GMs has said that generally the players don't pick all of the abilities that they have. I mean, obviously that's kind of like a high level thing, but most of them have like a bread and butter set of abilities that they use, and then they don't really explore like every other ability list in the list. And I think that's sort of expected. That's kind of normal. Like even when I'm playing D&D and such, I probably have like a small number of spells or abilities that I can remember off the top of my head, but then all the others I sort of like go back and check on like my character sheet or whatever it is, to remember that I had it so that I can use it. And so, because obviously the mission, one of the design goals for Voyager that I wanted is to have minimal bookkeeping, which is to say, you shouldn't need to rely on looking back at the rulebook or your character sheet you should already know what to do just off the top of your head. I want to lean more into having characters be more self-contained. So obviously they have less room for exponential growth as like traditional playbook characters with like lots of levels and spells and stuff, but they would focus more on, I guess, a very strong set of core abilities instead. So if I were to use like, Arknights or Star Rail or any gacha game as an example, you have these separate characters who have a very clear niche. So like, let's say Chi is a healer who does like ice magic, and that's sort of like her thing, right? And then another character uses this element and is a damage dealer. Another one is like a AoE lightning user. So each character has like certain boxes that they occupy, that they then can use to that they can sort of occupy different gameplay niches. So, and that's sort of like the extent of what they do, and you can sort of level them up. Yes, you can level them up, but that's mostly just numbers, and I kind of want to minimize numbers in my game, so there won't really be much of like levels or stat growth, but more in like, maybe you can learn new skills or you can equip different weapons that gives you more tools to do things. But I want to minimize as much like modifiers and stats as possible, so it's more like a horizontal progression model. So to that end, one thing that I was sort of discussing with letters and punctuation was the idea of like a skill inheritance system. So what I mean by that is, so we have the player characters, and they would have, so when you're creating a character, what I was thinking is you would have a set of you would build them based on certain archetypes. So let's say there's like a mage archetype, and the mage archetype can be divided into, like a elemental mage, a time mage, a healer, that kind of thing. And then you have like maybe a fighter archetype, and a fighter could be any number of things. So if you wanted to make your own custom character, you would make them based on that archetype, and then you would probably take like some abilities from here and there, and then mix and match them together, and that would be your main character. And then but then there will be some characters that have different abilities and such like that. And I think one way to sort of have your character learning more abilities, so the previous version 0.4 model, the version 0.4 model had a very traditional XP system. So you had an XP system where every time you completed an adventure and stuff like that, you would get a set amount of XP, and then you would use that XP to buy advancements for your Voyager. So you can buy, basically you can give them more resolve, more health. Basically you can make them learn a new ability. So that's sort of a very traditional XP slash skill point type system. But one thing that I think could be interesting here for version 0.5 is kind of a skill inheritance slash mentorship system. So you have, let's say you have your character here who wants to learn a new ability. So then you would see that one of the pre-generated characters. So this is an actual character that lives in the world. Let's say this samurai guy. So he's like an old veteran Voyager who's been around for a long time. He has a bunch of sword related abilities, right? So he has like stuff all about like using katanas, and it's kind of like the arms master venture. So that's his venture. He's sort of like a sword master, and during your adventures you can take your playable character on voyages, but you can also bring this guy, what do I call him? Let's say I call him Jin, and you can bring Jin out on expeditions. You can use him, like I said, you can recruit him and add him to your team, and then you find out that you actually really like Jin. You like how he plays, and you really like one of his abilities, which is like this kind of, I don't know, like this EI katana slash thing. And then you can sort of roleplay that your PC, your custom character, wants to learn a skill from Jin, which is the recruited character. So then, instead of like an XP system where you just sort of buy whatever you want, it's more like, if you want to learn new abilities, you have to approach different NPCs, say NPCs, but actually they're all playable. So it's more like different voyages within the world, and like between missions, say I want to train with you and learn this skill, and then he would agree, and then through like a matter like in between missions you will learn, and then eventually your custom character would learn like one of those skills, and it gets like it gets inherited by him, or like it gets mentored to him. So this actually gives an incentive for player characters for the players to interact with all the recruitable characters, because if they only make their custom character, you only have like a few starting abilities that you can get from any archetype. But if you wanted to learn more abilities, so if you wanted to learn more spells and stuff like that, it's not actually tied to your XP growth. It's more tied to having to interact with and go on missions with other characters from the recruitment pool. So it's almost like you can imagine, because the vibe that I want to go with Voyager is maybe not so much on like personal progression, but it's more like on a sense of this sort of camaraderie and building up relationships with other Voyagers, because the entire combat system is about reactions and having tag team attacks with people. So the game itself is kind of about sort of having teamwork with people. So the idea is you have this one of the recruit characters, Jin, who maybe while playing, one of the players decided to bring him along on a mission, and then you observe that while they were playing them, they had these really cool skills in battle. So then when you are leveling up your player character, you can decide, I want to inherit one of his skills, and you will do that over like between missions and stuff like that. So essentially it's still actually the same thing as XP, in the sense that in the old version, XP, you got like a bit of XP after each adventure, and you would spend it on abilities. But here it's more like the context has just been changed, but mechanically it's the same, where maybe you would spend like bond points or mentorship points or whatever it is to sort of learn an ability from another recruitable character, and that's sort of how you would progress your Voyager and level them up by learning additional abilities that way. and I think, yeah, I kind of like that idea, so I might go with that. Let's see. So then, of course, it means that we do need like a strong pool of characters to work with, because one of the things that's going to be like the core parts of this game is going to be having a strong, large cast of recruitable characters that you can learn from and bring onto your teams. And this is also good for beginner players, because then that means they don't have to make a playable character, like an original custom character, if they're playing the game for the first time. All they need to do is to look through the list of the recruited characters, the pre-generated characters, and just select one of them and take them on their first adventure. You know, when you're like playing the game at like a con, or you're sort of introducing the game to your group for the first time, you can just say, you can make your own character if you want, or you can sort of select from one of the many recruits, and mechanically they'll just play the same way. So that's how I would go about approaching that. So then, and of course, like what letters and punctuation said, that yeah, they have like, you know, they've been like commissioning and gathering like a lot of art and stuff for like for different Voyagers and NPCs that, you know, they used in their campaign. And even like POW, Hero Medley, has been, you know, showing and drawing art for like some new Voyagers. So, you know, from all like this art of different characters that we get, we can use them to create these sort of recruitable characters and add them, so that players can choose from them to add to their parties and such. So based on that, I think that's all I wanted to talk about. Let me see. So from here, I guess one last thing I can, so probably kind of a short stream, but one last thing I maybe want to bring up is the relics and the pads. So for, let me find the relics. Yeah, POW is really good. I'm gonna keep getting him to draw a bunch of Voyager stuff, because his style really matches the aesthetic I imagined for the world. But for relics, here we are. Okay, so one of the ideas that I was let me switch to the one of the ideas that I was entertaining. Oh, let me switch back the clip actually. So one of the ideas that I had was to sort of implement some slight roguelike elements to Voyager, which is to say that because, you know, it's sort of like a scenario-based game where you go out on like one-shots and episodic adventures. And of course, the fact that you're handling like a bunch of different playable characters, I kind of wanted to keep the sort of individual character progression kind of low, because if you're handling a bunch of characters at once, you kind of don't want to force the players to have to track who is more level than the others, and, you know, stuff like that. So I needed other ways to sort of grant different stat boosts and buffs to characters in a way that was a bit more fresh. And two of those was with relics and with pads, which is all tentatively named, but that's kind of where it's at now. And relics were sort of like items, magic items. So relics were magic items that would that reset every voyage. And paths were kind of... paths are sort of like boons, I guess. Blessings from beyond. Alright, so let me just really quick talk about them. So relics. So obviously the game Voyager is sort of based around the idea of exploring an unknown world and bringing back your findings. So that would obviously it feels like encountering lost artifacts and relics would be very important to the experience of playing it. So one way I've thought about implementing it without overloading the player with a lot of inventory management, right? Because like in D&D, what you would have is a lot of magic items, so like, you know, weapons and stuff like that you would gather and store in your inventory. You can use them, but eventually, of course, that led to a bookkeeping problem. You had to remember what did what, and will also lead to problems like if you lost the magic item, then essentially your character will be gimped, right? Like if something destroyed your magic item, or if you lost it, you're essentially like losing levels, because then your character be vastly less powerful than they should be. So one thing I wanted to change about that context of magic items is that relics, if you play it like a roguelike game or anything like that, a roguelike game, you would sort of go on a run, and you would encounter random items or blessings that you find, and these would reset every time you died or that you came back and finished one session of the game. But you can collect them and take note of them, and you can sort of manipulate how often you can get them, but they're always temporary. So the idea here is that so in universe, there's an explanation for this. So whenever you collect relics out in the world, the whole idea of Exodus is that they're trying to preserve the memories of the old world, which is Earth, post-apocalypse Earth. And so anything from like the bottle you see here to this pen or anything at all is considered like something valuable, because, you know, like how we consider any archaeological item to be of value, whether it's like a bunch of old coins or broken pottery, all of them are useful because they tell us about the past. So it's the same way for the people thousands of years from now who discover all of our old junk. They would find it valuable because, you know, either way it is like they're linked to their past, which is our present. So when you encounter these relics would be archived and stored in like a museum or within Exodus itself. But the phytosapiens, which are like the magic plant people, they are also making copies of these relics, magical copies of these relics, and committing them into the dreaming. And the dreaming is this law thing where it's like a collective unconscious, where all like humanity's past and future memories and experiences are stored, and like characters like Niwa, they're sort of able to tap into the dreaming. But basically these magical copies are sort of saved into the cloud, so to speak, and sometimes they might magically appear to people. So the actual physical object is still stored in a museum, but a magical copy of the relic sort of propagates around and appears to people, because these items sort of have like a life of their own. And that's sort of how you would explain encountering these sort of relics and using them without worrying about, you know, like breaking them or destroying them. And these are called simulacra. And simulacra allows you to encounter these relics. So you would encounter, like, let's say 3 of them, and you would pick one, and then the rest would disappear. And each of these simulacra would give a unique buff or effect onto your party for that adventure. So it's essentially like having a free magic item that you can use anytime, but it disappears after you finish your mission. So then it will sort of be reabsorbed into the dreaming, and that's sort of how it sort of keeps adventures quite novel and different, because there's always like a chance of encountering a simulacra, which might greatly change the way you play the mission, for better or for worse. So I wrote up a bunch of them in like the factions area, because they're also very flavorful, because each region has its own range of simulacra, of relics that sort of speak to the general flavor of that faction. So if I can find where it is, right, so for like Aiden is like the main human area, and it has like this sort of knightly heraldic vibe to it. You know, they have like a very culture focused around knighthood. They have a lot of simulacra or relics based on these sort of ideas. So one of these is Lavalis Broken Aegis, and this is basically a magic item that gives all allies one shield at the start of each combat encounter. Or we have Elder Fruit, which is like a fruit from the world tree, which will heal you after each combat encounter. We have the Prism Light Shield, which debuffs all enemies during battle. So all these sort of items, you can collect a bunch of them during each adventure, and they would sort of give your voyage party buffs each time. That will sort of help you on your journey. And of course, since they reset every time, it's not something that you have to like concern yourself every time. It's just sort of like, you know, because they're only relevant for that adventure, you can sort of take note of them, and they're sort of easier to remember that way, so you don't forget to use them, because you know they're only relevant for that day's events. And there's a whole bunch of different I plan to sort of make even more types of relics and simulacra that have really interesting interactions. So if I can like go through some of them, is so like the Aiden ones, because of course a lot of this is free world building stuff as well, because you know, reading through them, it sort of gives you an idea of what this faction is about and what type of relics they produce. So Aidens are all like mainly focused around defense and healing, because they're sort of like this defensive faction. For the, let's see, so for the, this is not yet done, the cartograph charter is not yet done. I think the Shardlands had some. So for the Shardlands, they have more towards like damage and like fighting, because they're kind of like a very warrior culture. So I didn't write out the thing for this yet, but they have relics like Dragon Teeth, like a Lost Clans banner, which is all allies have a boost to their dice rolls when they're below half health. So it's like a very berserker type relic. Another one is the Soul Empire, which is like an industrial empire, and they have more like fire based relics. So Sun Warrior Sigil, party is immune to Sunblight. So Sunblight is some new thing I'm working on, but it's just basically like, it just means burn damage, right? So like damage over time. So they're immune to burn damage, and they have like relics that allow you to inflict burn on enemies, stuff like that. Dust, so Dust is the Alliance clans, and they have a lot of stuff related to like rogue stuff or like treasure hunting, because that's sort of where they go. So that's like, so one of them is Pierced Fedora, which is take less damage from traps, so it's a very useful relic for exploring dungeons. That's sort of all for that one. What else? The Eries have more towards like ranged attacks and lightning. So we have the Thunder Dragon Spine relic, which is whenever the holder, and the holder is the person who holds the relic. So some of these relics, they apply to your entire party, and some of them apply only to the person who is currently holding the relic. So when the holder attacks, it erupts, chain lightning erupts from their attacks, so that's like a very powerful attack relic. Black Arrowhead, all of your aim actions are aligned, which is it's just basically like it means you have higher crit chance, stuff like that. What else? So just to sort of give a general idea of what the Simulacra does. Skodos has a lot of interesting ones, because Skodos has a lot of undead flavored stuff that interacts with your health. So and they have a lot of very flavorful relics. So they have Martyr's Blood Vial. During combat, all enemies within a set distance of the holder are instantly taunted. So what this means is when you are holding this relic, and once you have a relic, you can't remove it. Like, it latches onto you until it disappears. So you can't get rid of it. So when you start a battle, every enemy that is near the person holding this relic will only target that person. So that could be either very bad or very good, that you have to strategize your adventure around it, because since relics are sort of randomly encountered, you might end up having this or you might not, and it can be an interesting way to sort of add some novelty into your adventures. So you have like Warhound's Mane, which gives everyone a boost to movement and initiative. So it's like imagining like going into battle, like a rallying sort of relic. Bugle of the Were Horde, which is basically conflict timer, is another thing, but it just means that it allows you to resolve fights faster. Silent Shrieking Skull, I like this one. Every round in combat, the party loses health, but they gain damage, and that's a very interesting relic that we can do. Selfish Doll reduces other relics from appearing, because it's like it wants all your attention on it, so it reduces the chances of other relics appearing, and all a bunch of these other stuff. So there's a lot of interesting ways that these and like Ethereal Lantern, which is a ghost lantern, it makes the holder intangible. I think that'd probably be like an extra feature or something, but it basically makes you a ghost and you almost can't interact with anything except through certain ways. So these are like very flavorful, nice ways to insert novel situations into your party, but because they only last for that one mission, that one adventure, and then they disappear, you don't have to worry about it like screwing your entire campaign, because it's just for that one session that they apply. So I think relics would be quite fun to work with. But that's it for relics. So what was the other thing I wanted to show? So pets. Okay, so for pets, this is very much based on like Star Rail and other games. So this has to do with some world building stuff. So let me bring up Obsidian real quick. So so in Voyager has a very strong theme around the idea of mythology, because obviously a lot of its culture, a lot of the people in the new world sort of is very like Ruby-like, where like they have like these concepts and ideas that are based from like mythology and fairy tales, but sort of recontextualized. So in Voyager's context, in Voyager's case, these legends are recontextualized because they've been lost to time, and the people of the new world are trying to figure out what did these legends mean, what meaning did they have for the people of Earth, the old world. And so there's a very strong mythological theme in Voyager, and I think one of the ways, and previously in version 0.4, a lot of the ways that this theme happened was through these mythological figures, these sort of ventures focused on mythological figures. So if I were to look at, say, let me check Scribus. So like recently, at least in version 0.4, we had the Venator, which is like the Ruby class, and the Venator, they were about the visage, the Venator's visage, which is like a mythological figure that attaches themselves to them. So like in Ruby sense, it's like their semblance essentially, but and it's sort of like a mythological figure that sort of you gain the favor of, or it sort of like attaches itself to you, and it's sort of like ambiguous, like whether these figures are actually real or is a manifestation of the dreaming. And like I said, the dreaming is this sort of collective unconscious of humanity, so it's sort of like you're left wondering, are these gods actually real, or is it because they're sort of manifesting from like the memories of humanity of these gods. So that's sort of the main idea behind why these figures appear and give the Venator's power. And this is even, I guess, even more explicitly shown with the Invoker class, the Invoker venture. And the Invoker is essentially like a warlock or summoner, and what they did is, so the Invoker is basically like a summoner type venture, and what they had an exemplar, and an exemplar was basically like, is essentially like a persona from the Persona games. So you have like this mythological being that you can summon and who fights in your stead. So it's essentially like a persona or like a stand, or whatever you want to call them. And even here, like when you make an Invoker, you can sort of roll on a table to see what type of exemplar you summon. So like it could be a historical figure, a mythological figure, an angel, a demon, and these are all explained by the dreaming. So your exemplar is an echo from Earth's history or mythology, whose reputation and renown in past humanity's consciousness coalesced within the dreaming and manifest in reality. That's sort of the explanation behind all these mythological figures appearing within the new world. So going based off of that, since that theme was already established, one of the things that I also wanted to experiment with is the concept of paths. So paths is also very much influenced from stuff like Honkai Star Rail, where to explain how it was in Star Rail is basically like it was like domains. So domains that were presided over by different gods in that setting. So how it went was like, if there was a god of healing, then characters who followed that path had like healing abilities. If they had like a god of protection, preservation, then characters would have abilities from that had like shield allies and stuff like that. And I always liked that idea because even in certain other RPGs and games as well, there's sort of like this idea that your class and then what sort of god or figure that you followed sort of reflects in it. So it's a very nice avenue for people to sort of like get into the lore and build characters around. So one of the ways I was thinking of how to include these additional gameplay aspects for like kind of pseudo progression, or rather extra things for the PCs to interact with, because obviously if we're going to like limit the linear progression of the PCs, meaning they can't really gain levels or XP, they mostly can just learn new abilities from other recruits. I wanted to give them more tools to do things within each section, even if there wasn't that much progression. And one of them was the relics, like I mentioned, and another is through these pads or focuses or whatever you want to call them. But they are essentially like you can think of them as manifestations of ideas, right? So like I said, of how these mythological figures from the dreaming sort of manifest and affect the magical world of Revenir. These sort of ideas also coalesce within the world and sort of affect the lives of the people in the world. So whenever someone sort of and you can think of it like how patron deities work in olden times. So in like ancient Greek society, you had like Zeus, you had like all these other gods, but there are often a lot of patron deities of other things that you would pray to whenever you want a blessing from them during your travels. So let's say if you were a sailor, you would pray to the patron deity of Poseidon because you wanted Poseidon to give you good weather and you didn't want any storms while you were fishing or out sailing. So it's kind of like the idea of offering tribute or fealty to like a certain deity or figure in order to bless whatever you're doing. So I kind of like that idea that characters in the Voyager world, they may not like necessarily worship these things because they're more like general concepts, but they do like maybe like adhere to certain philosophies, or they offer tribute to certain concepts or ideas that allows them to, like, through the magic of the world tree, manifest like the blessings of these ideas into their lives, and that's just like an in-universe way of explaining how mechanically, in the game sense, how you can gain these sort of blessings and such during your adventures. So I haven't really like thought much about how that would work mechanically yet, but let's say one of the paths is the path of resilience. So this is a health-based path or focus, and let's say before each adventure you can choose which patron deity to offer tribute to before you start your adventure. So the same way as how like a sailor would ask for Poseidon's blessing before they go out on their journey, your Voyager or your team would also sort of like ask for a blessing so that their journey will go well. So let's say if you ask for a blessing from the path of resilience, then you will gain like certain benefits from it. So like one of them is, so this is like health based, so like you get an increased maximum resolve, which is your health. So it's sort of like the idea that instead of like leveling up characters in order to gain health, that is sort of like their linear progression thing, you would instead at the start of each adventure you would instead take one of the resilience blessings, and that is your main way of increasing your max health, and then that would lead to going through certain builds, maybe like if you wanted to try like, this adventure, I wanted to try a max health build, so like just get your health as high as possible, and for that adventure. Or you want to go for like a damage based build, you would instead pray or offer tribute to the Path of Blades, which greatly amplifies your damage. So it is like through this system that is sort of how you actually get so-called stats in this game. And because I myself, this is coming from a philosophy that I adhere to, which is I myself like the idea of having this kind of character builds, team compositions within a game. Like I myself, as like a fan of like Star Rail and Arknights, what I really love to do is I love to make team compositions and builds on the fly. So if I needed a team to handle a certain situation, I would change my team on the spot so that I could best optimize them to handle that problem. So I think having this sort of system sort of embodies what I kind of want to do, is that in that you can sort of fine-tune your stats in a way that wasn't permanent, so that it sort of adapts according to the situation, and that is unique each time, so that it's not like you have just like a standard RPG where you just level up and gain HP until you have like, let's say, 100 HP, and that's sort of how it is for the entire game. But instead it's more like during this adventure you would follow a path that gave you 100 HP, and that is sort of like defines your playstyle during that session, and that was sort of, and this combined with like the relics and like recruiting people and all that is sort of, I guess, what I intend to do with the system. It sort of gives you a very session to session focus on each adventure, because like I said, I designed Voyager to be very scenario based, very episodic, meaning it's like very good for one shots. So what I wanted to do is to not make it so reliant on long form games where you have to build your character up over time, but it's more towards like making each and every individual adventure you go on feel unique and interesting. And so having these sort of relics and paths and recruitment and stuff like that that mostly applies on an adventure by adventure basis is sort of really leaning into what I plan to do with the system. And of course if you wanted to, you could transition it into like a long form type of game where you do eventually like gain more stats as you level up, but that's not the intention that I have with the system. I do want to make it more like one shot friendly, make it so that you don't have to track your character's growth over a long time. It's just like, whatever is happening in this adventure is what you focus on, and that makes for like a more, and I hopefully it makes for a more tighter experience where it's just like all the fun is just sort of condensed into this one session that you have, even if you only play it for like one time. The one time that you play it may be so interesting that you might want to try another session, and then another, and then another. So that's kind of the mindset that I have regarding all of the concepts that I talked about today. So that, I believe, is everything I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to continue workshopping this. So I think I learned a lot from like talking about it like about today's stream. So a lot of the stuff about like recruitment, inheriting skills, having the pool of recruits. I think I'll go with that idea and workshop it. So I'll probably implement that into the PDF, unless a better idea or different idea comes along. So for right now, for version 0.5, until I change my mind, I guess, we're gonna have the idea that we might probably have a GM, so a GM might stay, but the GM sort of takes on the role of the liaison, who arranges all of the adventures, and then the players are free to make their own custom character, but they're also free to recruit and field recruits who are these pre-generated characters, and then send them on different missions, concurrent missions or simultaneous missions throughout the world map. And even like what I said about like going on the map of the known world and like adding points of interest everywhere, and hopefully all of this combined together with the relics, with the paths and everything I said, is going to combine together into a very strong, very evocative experience of like, you know, exploration, community sort of interacting and sharing information with other Voyagers, and the sense of like mythology and exploring the unknown. So that's like the summary of all of today's points. If you enjoyed anything you heard about like all the game design stuff, feel free to join the Tabletop Discord, which is in the description, where I will just continue talking and developing Voyager, and we are pretty much on the fast track to making this reality as soon as possible. And I hope to I definitely expect that version 0.5 is going to be one of a really big update. It's going to have a lot of new content, reworked content essentially, and that's going to definitely take a few weeks at least. But I hope once that's all done and everyone, you know, starts playing it proper, it's going to be something really cool, and we'll be one step closer to a fully realized 1.0 release. So with all that said, thank you all for joining me and hearing me ramble on about my little system, and I'll probably most likely see you tomorrow.